The K-Jazz Show, Sundays on Kofifi FM 97.2.
There are musicians who play the bass, and there are those musicians, they understand that the bass is not merely an instrument. It is a place from which the entire architecture of a song can be imagined. And on the KJ Show this Sunday, we travel from the foothills of New England to the streets of New York City, from the discipline of the sideman to the freedom of the composer, from the visions of Phaedrus to the reigning years. Of course, our guest has spent nearly 2 decades absorbing New York, the clubs, the musicians, the late nights, and the conversations in between. Of course, Timothy has shared stages with some extraordinary names, taught at the jazz at the Lincoln Center, crossed the continent, and somewhere along the way, he developed a voice that belongs entirely to him. And there is something particularly beautiful about this conversation because on his newest musical chapter, the American bassist and composer, Timothy Joseph Norton, finds himself in a conversation with 2 remarkable South African musicians, the extraordinary pianist and composer Bokani Dyer and Sia Charles, who is a trombonist. This Sunday, we don't simply talk about the album, we go back to the beginning. We trace the road from the vision to the years that follow, to the encounters, the people, the lessons, the silence, and the bass. Of course, the composition, including the becoming. Please welcome Timothy Joseph Norton. Hello, sir. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. You know, Tim, before New York, before the festivals, before the great rooms and the remarkable musicians, there was New England. Let's go back there. You know, as a young man at the foothills of New England, what did music mean to you? You know, before you understood that it might just be your life.
So I'm from a city called Hartford, Connecticut, which even though it's the capital of the state of Connecticut, it's a pretty small city, but it's sandwiched right between New York and Boston, which are major cities. So a lot of really great musicians passed through, and it had a really strong scene for jazz. So growing up, there was a lot of concerts, there was a lot of great musicians in and out, and I was able to be exposed to music, you know? So I had a lot of really great teachers, and I went to arts high school where I just played jazz. I would do all my morning academics, and then in the afternoon it was all jazz focused. So it was really great in that way for exposure to music and playing and all of it.
And you've called that city home for almost 2 decades. You know, and I want us to talk about what New York took away from you and what did it give back that you could never have found anywhere else?
Well, I'm still here. I'm still in Queens, New York. So New York, when I graduated college, there was almost this like pull to go to New York. It was like a migration. All the kids that were really into jazz, it was just like the only option for us to go to New York. It was close. And it just seemed like there was so many musicians you had to go. And it wasn't even about making a living at first. It was just about playing with with the cats, playing with the other musicians. And I would go to jam sessions, I'd do apartment sessions and all of that. And that was my first few years of just doing that until I kind of found my people, found my footing, found my scene, and then started to carve out a career.
Let's navigate that for a second. Let's indulge it. You get to New York City, this big city, and you are a musician, you're a jazz musician, and you're trying to find jazz. What did that look like?
Well, it was a bit of a shock for me. And I was, the thing about being a jazz musician, especially in New York, it's a war of attrition because you're constantly up against the wall. Now, before I left Boston, I had a really good gig at this place called Wally's with this great trumpet player. It was 3 nights a week. I was playing outside of that. I had some teaching work. I was already making a living doing just music. And then I moved to New York, and it's just like 0 gigs. There are no opportunities. I am just one in a pool of unknown bass players. So at first it was really kind of overwhelming, and a lot of people get weirded out by that. They get really turned off by how overwhelming the scene is because there's so many musicians and it seems like everybody already has it all figured out. They have their own band, they have their own people, but I just kept at it. And when I met people I liked, I would just say, hey, you sound great. Can we get together and play? And then I was able to play in my apartment and organize sessions and stuck it out.
There's an extraordinary humility to the bass, Tim. It can disappear, in fact, into the architecture of a band sometimes, and this is just from me being in the setting where I'm in the live music room. Yet when it speaks, everything changes. When did you stop thinking of the bass as an instrument? And maybe you played and began to understand that it is a voice which you could think.
Well, I like to, especially when I compose, I like to build the song from whatever the bass is doing. That's the foundation of the house. That's where the basement is, and everything else goes on top of that. So I feel like I always kind of knew that I would be gravitating towards that. And the role of a bass player, I feel like it's almost parental, because you have this push and pull of the other things, the rhythm section and other things in the band, and you're this pillar. And for me, at least my style of bass playing, I like to hold it down. There's some bass players that really let go, and they're really great at that. Me, I like to stay the course, set the sail. So that's kind of how I found my voice, through the bass.
Kofifi FM. This Sunday, we are spending time with Tim Norton, of course. He is our guest for our weekly feature, The Jazz Circuit. And of course, we traveled as far as New York City this Sunday, to find him and talk to him. Of course, he's got a brand new project, The Raining Years. That's what we are talking to him about, of course, including his life story. In fact, you can look at this conversation as introducing Tim Norton to our audiences. Of course, South Africa, that is on Kofifi FM 97.2. Now, Tim, you've stood beside musicians such as John McNeil, Jason Palmer, Ralph Peterson, and of course, Jeff Payne Watts. Those are just simply not just credits. They are musical educations. Can I call them that? What did being a sideman teach you about listening and becoming a leader? Or in fact, listening that becoming a leader never could, if I may put it that way.
So each great person I've played with, and any person I've played with, there's lessons from everyone, and they're all different. From playing with Jason Palmer, we had that gig at Wally's for a number of months. He is a risk taker as a composer, as a musician, all of it. And he taught me that it was okay to take risks compositionally and playing wise. That being said, he's one of the most well-practiced musicians I've ever encountered. So when he does take a risk, there's a certain amount of things behind it, a certain amount of measurement that goes into it. From Ralph Peterson, he taught me, he was a very tough guy and a very old school teacher. And he gave me lessons like how to carry myself, how to approach conversations with humility and trepidation at the same time. He was a true mentor. John McNeil, he ran a jam session in Brooklyn that I played a bunch of times. He was a hilarious person. And the lesson from him that I think all of his students and everybody that knew him would agree with is to have humor in everything, in every aspect of leading a band and life and all of it. So those are just some that come to mind.
I love that about, the interactions with the musicians, because all of a sudden, and I often say, never meet your heroes. But at this point, you meet your heroes and you realize that they're just as human as you are.
Definitely.
Yeah. And it was in November of 2022, Tim, when you gave us the Visions of Phaedrus, your first major statement as a leader. And when you listen to that record today, let's talk about that. Do you hear the musician you were, the composer you were becoming, or maybe the man that you had not learned that you had become?
Definitely all of that. What's interesting is listening to it now, now that I've gotten away from it and I don't listen to it that much anymore. When I go back and visit it, I'm most proud of the compositions. I'm like, wow, I wrote some nice stuff. This is music that, now I would enjoy listening to. I feel like I've developed a ton as a bass player. I've just been in a lot of really high power situations and developed a ton as a bass player since then. So I feel like as on my instrument, I'm much stronger now than I was then.
And it's been 4 years, that can change a musician profoundly since the project, The Visions of Phaedrus. And of course, between that project and The Raining Years, there's been stages, classrooms, European tours, New York nights, and countless musical conversations. What happened to Tim, in those 4 years that the first album could not possibly have told us? Because I think we as listeners listen intently. And when you say this is your sophomore project, we want something different. Or maybe we want the same thing, but I don't know what we want. But we want you to tell the story differently. So maybe whilst we're reflecting, let's talk about, since the release of the debut, we're sitting with the sophomore, What are you saying now that you didn't say then?
That's actually a very good question. And what happened to me happened to everyone. So when I wrote that first album was during the pandemic. And how I wrote it was I would just at the piano figuring out writing my tunes until I narrowed it down to a batch of tunes that I liked. And in my neighborhood, a lot of great jazz musicians live here. So we all had nothing to do because it was the pandemic and we were all on lockdown. So we would get together 2, 3, 4 times a week and play each other's tunes. And so I was able to workshop the tunes that way until I had exactly the tunes I wanted in exactly the shape I wanted. And I was really comfortable on them from playing them a lot. And then what happened since that whole thing went down, oh yeah, and that's the last thing about Visions of Phaedrus, is I was able to get a really great band because no one could tour. It's all touring musicians on that record, and they were all around. So fast forward 4 years, the Renning years, this project looks way different. For one is, everybody got back on the road, everybody got back to work, so including myself. That's why it took me 4 years to put out another album, is because I've been working. My main work is as a sideman. I play with a lot of great people, including a lot of great South Africans. So it was much harder to just get everything together. That being said, I was able to roughly do the same thing where I workshopped a bunch of tunes that I liked and got them in the shape I liked, and was able to line up the band and all of that. So the Renning years reflects just experience as a professional musician, just 4 years of touring and playing and all of it.
Gofifi FM. This Sunday on the KHS show, we're sitting quietly in the company of Timothy Norton this Sunday. And it's all about the wedding years. It's all about the vision of Phaedrus. This is a conversation that I've been waiting to have for a while, and he will be the one to attest that I've been pestering him, on the socials. I've been pestering him to kind of get an insight and listen closely. And of course, this was spurred on because he's got an upcoming project that he is releasing, which is The Reigning Years. And I find that album title very interesting. And of course, on The Reigning Years, Tim, your musical world intersects with South Africa through, two extraordinary musicians, pianist Bokani Dyer and trombonist Sia Charles. What did you hear, maybe, in the South African musical imagination that you made, or maybe that made you want, I guess, these specific voices inside the story?
So to answer that, what I'll do is I'll go back to where I met both of them. Bokani I met because I was hired to work with his father in his band, Dyer. Bokani's also in that band.
Yeah.
And right away, we just clicked. There's a lot that Bokani and I agree with that we've never even talked about. Things like how we approach harmony. We both like the same kind of harmony, and that was huge for me. And the way that he'll interpret chords. I play in his trio a lot too, so the way that I interpret bass, we're on the same page musically, on the same wavelength. And we've been touring we've done several tours now together. So we just clicked, and that was like, I got to have this guy on my record. And then it worked out where he was around and he was available. And so Sia and I met I think we met because we were both doing workshops at Jazz Lincoln Center when she was still a student at Juilliard. And then we started playing a little bit too. I hired her for some stuff. She hired me for some stuff. And then I did her graduate recital at Juilliard. And then I remember afterwards, I was just like, hey, if you're around, I'm going to be doing this record. And it was just, the stars just aligned because she was on tour with a theater company. And she gets like, 1 day off every few weeks. And the 1 day off she had was the day that we were recording, and she could make it. So it just worked out very serendipitously. So, I was able to get these two great South African musicians featured on my album.
Really stunning musicians, by the way. Of course, that hold the flag high. And whenever we feature them here on the show, it's always such a marvel to have and to also witness the artistry and the discipline, that they have as musicians that really share themselves when they create the records. And of course, that's what we heard, as this Sunday, as we spend time, with Tim Norton. And we've been listening to music from his debut. And we've also just been tapping into the brand new project, which comes out in a few weeks, in fact, as we have this conversation. And there's something, speaking of the reigning years, Tim, there's something mysterious and almost literary about the reigning years. It sounds almost like a memory, a transformation, and of course, a time or occupying, the same room. What does the reigning years mean to Tim Norton? And what were you trying to say, perhaps, that words could not? Maybe start by defining the reigning years. What's the reigning years?
Sure. So reigning comes from the word wren, which is a bird. And in ancient Gaelic and Irish tradition, what reigning, there was called the Reigning Day, the Reigning Festival, where everybody would throw rocks at birds. And I thought it was a really powerful gesture and a really symbolic gesture. For one, the festival ritual represented this rebirth and this renewal. And that's one part of it I really liked. On the other part, it represents death and killing and getting rid of this thing, So the reigning years, to me, are a reflection of pretty much all my time in New York and all my time, especially the last, that 10-year period, maybe up until 3 or 4 years ago, where just being a working musician in New York, you feel like stones are getting thrown at you constantly. So it's a reflection of that period of just constantly having your back against the wall and persevering through it and working, trying to just trudge your way forward. That's basically what the reigning years, it's a very reflective thing.
And maybe let's also, whilst we're here, talk about the creative process. I mean, you define two different and maybe distinct, if I might use that word, energies or possibly, thought processes or headspaces. It's the birth of, and it's also the end of. Let's talk about the creative process, around the writing years.
So every song was different. I'll give you a few specific examples, though, that are particularly strong. For one, Marcy's World. Marcy is my daughter. And so that song has two very distinct parts to it, very different. And one of them, the first part, I wrote while she was in utero, while my wife was pregnant with her. And I just wrote part of a song and I just tabled it. And then she was born. And then shortly thereafter, it just came to me, the second half came out. So there's two parts of Marcy's World, the in utero part, which is all in F minor, and then the when she was in the world part, when she was born, which is all in D minor. So that one just kind of came into that way, Marcy's World. Frank's Dilemma, that one is, Frank is my son. There's a lot of family in this album too.
Yeah.
So Frank's Dilemma, that one I wrote when he was really young, when he was really one. And anybody who's a parent listening will relate to this. His dilemma when he was a really young infant and into toddlerhood was he absolutely hated to get his diaper changed. So we had to pin him down and wrestle him every single time. And when you listen to that song, it kind of has this, you can just picture a little toddler boy just walking around kind of clumsily but happily.
My gosh.
Almost, and so that's what Frank's Dilemma is about. And then what else is on that? Oh yeah, the song that just came out just last Friday, You and I Can Really Exist Together. That's one of the more powerful songs on the album, and that's what I wanted to release as the first single, because it's a very powerful song for me, at least. That one it's You and I Can Really Exist Together. It's about my wife. It's a love song for her. And it's about when you're in that part of the relationship where it's going really well and you start to really seriously picture a life with that person, and there's this great poet, one of the beat poets, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and I borrowed that line from one of his poems, You and I Can Really Exist Together. So those are the messages. The one song, David is my father. And that one, he played trumpet when he was really, really young. So it has this really strong trumpet intro to it. And then it's a very kind of ethereal, very heady, kind of notey melody that's almost atonal at times. And it's a reflection of him because of his line of work, where he does psychotherapy.
painting the picture of the reigning years here this Sunday with Timothy Norton this Sunday. And of course, we're leaning in closer, and of course, we're spending time with the music too. Yeah, on Coffee FM 97.2. It is the Jazz Circuit. We bring together music that meets the afternoon, and it is brand new and absolutely good for you. And Tim, you're a teacher as much as you're a student, and you also serve, as on the faculty anyway, at the Jazz at the Lincoln Center, standing on the other side, I suppose, of the musical conversation, guiding younger musicians. And when you teach, Tim, what do you hope your students learn that cannot be written in a textbook, supposedly charted on a page or counted in a bar, that also talks about sharing, the real Tim?
The one thing I try to instill in my students is how seriously you have to take this to have a career. A lot of them are young, and I say, whether or not you're here, this rehearsal is starting at 3:00. Whether or not I'm here, this rehearsal will begin at 3:00. It's not you get in and you tune up and you plug in and then you warm up. No, that's all taken before. So I try to instill in them to take the music very seriously. Do not waste a minute of anybody's time, my time, your own time, whoever's time, because time is of the essence.
I love that. Always show up, even if it's just for yourself. I think so. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And you've traveled, Tim, as we wrap this conversation up this Sunday, from New England to New York, from the small rooms to the international festivals we mentioned earlier, as a sideman, to a composer, to visions of Phaedrus, to the reigning years. But jazz has never really been about arriving, and we know this now, and it's always about consistently being in the moment. So as you stand, on the threshold of this brand new chapter, who is Tim today? Or maybe who's Tim becoming, perhaps? And what is music still waiting inside of him, saying or wanting to be heard?
Well, who is Tim today? Now, Tim is a working jazz musician, a working touring jazz musician. I'm very fortunate to have a pretty full schedule of tours ahead of me, going to some very, very great places. There's even rumors of next year a trip to South Africa.
Oh, stop.
But it's just rumors right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, right now I'm just focused on pulling the bass strings as hard as I can and playing the best music I can as a sideman, and hopefully a gig here or there as a leader. Teaching, I'm going to continue teaching at Jazz and Lincoln Center this fall. I'm really looking forward to working with the students there. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Oh, we love to hear it. And of course, we look forward to the rumor that has just dropped officially. It's no longer a rumor, it's a statement, it's a manifestation. We'd love to have you, in Johannesburg, to be in the presence and really sit at, your feet and take in the bass, as it were, because as told by Tim Norton. Of course, there is a beautiful reception, Coffee FM in Jazz, where we hear the finished record and imagine that the music began when the red light came on, which it didn't. However, it began much earlier in a childhood somewhere in New England, in the first encounter with the bass, in the first New York night, in the humility of listening, in the wisdom of borrowed from other musicians, and of course in the courage to finally say, this is my voice on this Sunday. Perhaps this is what makes the reigning years so compelling. And it is simply not just the second album or the sophomore, if you were. It is the evidence of a musician continuing to become. And of course, this Sunday we traveled that road with him. His name is Tim Norton. From the visions of Phaedrus to the music that now stretches across the Atlantic, finding common ground with the extraordinary musical imaginations of our very own South African artists, Bokani, Dyer and Sia Charles. And of course, Timothy Joseph Norton reminds us that the bass does not necessarily always have to demand your attention. Sometimes it simply holds the world together long enough for everyone else to tell the truth. Tim, thank you for trusting us with the story this Sunday.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
From New England to New York, from the sideman's chair to the composer's page, from the first vision to absolutely the reigning years. This has been, a conversation worthy to be had as we introduce for the very first time the Breaking the Story, maybe here on the KJS show. His name is Tim Norton.